That's right. Conversations with Carson.
That's it. Yeah.
Ontario's very own Joe Rogan experience.
Exactly. Yeah. I put a photo up and it was just like, oh, next Joe Rogan. Everyone was like, yeah, hopefully.
I'm stoked to be here, and can I say I'm very happy that for my episode you're rocking the socks with the sandals again.
Yes.
You wore shoes in the last episode.
That is very, very true.
So it's your trademark.
I think so. I had shoes in the last one. I was a little disappointed, but let's get back to the right quick start. All right, everybody, welcome back to episode number 6. Yeah, episode 6 of Carson's Conversations. Today I've got an amazing guest. He was actually my driving instructor, if we can go there. It was pretty great. We got to drive down in a little smart car. Tell me all the hints and stuff like that. But now he's got something bigger on and even better. So why don't you introduce yourself, Dan?
Yeah, my name's Daniel Ricottone. I'm a candidate running for the Hamilton West Ancaster Dundas riding in this upcoming federal election in October. The car instructor thing's interesting. So I've actually worked in television and film for 10 years, but after my contract expired with Cogeco, I wanted to take a little bit of a break, and a friend of mine ran a local school and he was looking for a driver, so I thought I would just do that on the side to make some extra cash. And really it was just about meeting awesome young people such as yourself, and you were one of the sharpest young individuals I ever met. The conversations we would have were very deep. You know, you talked about some pretty esoteric stuff.
For sure.
And
that's another thing that motivated me to have one of these things. I was like, I've had amazing conversations with Dan on so many different, like a ton of different topics, and I was like, why don't I just make it something else? So you were definitely one of the further pushing parts to make me do this.
If I had anything to do with contributing to you starting this podcast, I'm extremely honored by that.
Yeah,
that's
thank
amazing.
You. Yeah,
that's amazing.
For sure.
Yeah, so that was just a short thing just to give my friend a hand, and I'm done with that now. I'm just focusing full time on the campaign, and yeah,
that's awesome. So where'd you start off really on your TV stuff? So let's start off there. You talked about Cogeco and all that type of stuff. Whereabouts was that? How'd you get into it?
Well, from a very young age, I always loved film. I was a cinephile, kind of like Quentin Tarantino. He kind of grew up in a video store, was a video clerk, and then eventually wound up becoming one of Hollywood's greatest filmmakers. Yep. I kind of had this workaround to get rated R films where I would go to the public library and I would be able to get classics like Godfather, Patton, Apocalypse Now, all of these great films that you just couldn't get at a Rogers Video or a Blockbuster at the time. I'm not aging myself, hopefully, when I say that. You remember Blockbuster?
Yeah. Not too long ago.
Not too long ago. Rest in peace. But what I was able to do was get a taste for really rich cinema, just the greatest stories. The 70s, American cinema in the 70s was just at its apex. It was just the absolute best. You could not find films like the aforementioned that I just said in Hollywood today, and it's pretty much MCU, Pixar, and Star Wars, is the driving force behind Hollywood.
There's the occasional pop-up, which is really, really nice to see. But
isn't that the best when you have just a small film, even if it's just people talking, that really just, was a great example of that film, The Founder, with Michael Keaton, where he played Roy Kroc, who kind of stole McDonald's from exactly. That was a great film, and it was just this little independent movie. I saw a trailer for it. I thought that looks interesting, and went out to see it, and it was great. And there's nothing wrong with MCU movies. I loved Endgame. We talked about it a lot at the time, when we first met. And but I need, we want a little more than just spandex, right? And capes.
You definitely want a little bit more and difference from just seeing the same kind of superheroes up on the screen all the time and kind of taking over the box office, because there's nothing else right now.
It's Disney, really. What it is it was Francis Ford Coppola, one of the greatest filmmakers of our time, who directed Godfather 1, 2, Apocalypse Now, The Conversation, and he was the one that said, we probably haven't even reached 40% of what's possible in cinema. Yeah. Think of that. That's incredible. And we only just came into the advent of, 3D filmmaking with Avatar and that sort of thing around 2009. It's only been 10 years, right? So that's an incredible statement, but yet Hollywood is kind of creatively bankrupt. They just do the same thing over and over and over again, and it's because they're afraid to take risks. It's not so much about the artistry behind it, it's about making a profit, and they know these things will guarantee returns. I mean, look at the numbers. Endgame became the second highest film of all time, not adjusted for inflation.
Super close,
It didn't surpass Avatar. They tried to have that last kick at the can with that
With the
one
second
last
release?
weekend only
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Didn't quite work. So James Cameron, Canadian, still king of the hill.
taking it, yeah,
the
with
number
Titanic
one and the
too.
number 3 spot with Titanic. So it's pretty good. Pretty
cool,
representing Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You see it a lot now that there's so many Canadians that are out there just kind of doing their thing, and not only in Hollywood, but in just on the global spectrum. Like, Canada's sticking out, and they're doing real well, which is great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in college, there was a big Canadian movement with a lot of great music. There was Broken Social Scene, Dallas Green, a lot of bands like that were really just starting to break out into the music scene. And I don't know, what's big right now that's Canadian?
There's a whole bunch. Daniel Caesar's one of them. He's just one of kind of like an R&B kind of guy. And he's like, everybody loves him. He's like kind of a more relaxed kind of guy.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple other ones. There's Bieber, obviously, but like he's kind of done his own thing.
He's sort of Michael Jackson status, bigger than big. You know, can't really go anywhere in the public. That's
it's true. And then there's also like there's just actors as well. Like Ryan Reynolds, kind of like just got picked up with Deadpool and all those other movies now. So
Ryan Gosling from Burlington.
Yeah, that's true. There's tons. I don't know all of them. Like, I don't have a list or anything like that. But there's a whole bunch of Canadians that are in it doing it just even now, which is really cool.
I have to say, speaking of Ryan Gosling, that man can pick his scripts. He must have a great agent, because a few of the films he was in will probably wind up being in my top 10 favorite films of the decade, that being The Big Short. That's one of those films where I'd say that's must viewing. If you want to find out how crony capitalism just destroyed America and created the 2008 stock market crash, that's the film to watch. And also he was in Drive, which was this kind of experimental film with a great kind of electronica soundtrack. Did you see Drive?
Yeah.
Drive was fantastic. Those two films in particular would be in my top 10. The only film that's left coming out this year that could potentially make my top 10 of the decade, this being the last year of the decade, would be maybe Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the new Tarantino.
But what I just heard, because you know how Quentin Tarantino said that's going to be like his last movie?
Yeah.
He said that they're the
No,
only...
10. He's going to 10.
Yeah, okay, yeah, but the thing is, the last movie that he said he'd make would be the R-rated Star Trek.
Interesting.
Which would be...
That's kind of a waste, in my opinion.
It might be, but it like... The way, because Star Trek's got a pretty cool cast, and it's just kind of like crazy and open and all that stuff. Like that's the more realistic version of like sci-fi and type of stuff like that. Yeah. Where like Star Wars is the super like fantasy kind of thing.
Star Wars is fantasy. Science fiction is. Star Trek is truly science fiction, because science fiction is really about ideas. Versus Star Wars is just a swashbuckler in space.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it'd be kind of cool just to see how Quentin Tarantino can make maybe like his.
Could be interesting.
Because you never really know because he's always been to, I got to make my own thing. I'm never really in a franchise. But if he tries one thing in a franchise and it just takes off, I'm kind of curious to see how that would play out.
It's possible. At one point, he wanted to make a Bond film. He wanted to keep Pierce Brosnan, and he wanted to cast Uma Thurman, naturally, as the Bond girl.
Yeah, that would have been pretty cool.
Would have been interesting, but then we wouldn't have had Casino Royale, and I wouldn't want that.
Those are legendary movies.
Yeah, it's one of the best in the Bond franchise, for sure.
For sure. But the new ones are actually really good too, like Skyfall and all those ones. And I'm waiting for the newer one to come out, and then it's and there's also it's even just kind of a spiral of like spy movies, like Kingsman and all that stuff. Those are also really good movies. Mm-hmm. But let's get away from movies for a bit. Let's talk about where that love for film that we just rambled on about for a couple minutes is, where did that really take you? Because you went into film. Like,
you could see the passion based on the way I talk.
Just the list.
So what it was I was able to rent some of the all-time greats at the library, and I just developed this taste for cinema, and I started playing around with a camcorder, and it's so much easier now. People have 4K on their phones.
Yeah, my phone has.
You can buy a little Merlin Steadicam for nothing and just have great production value. At the time, I was probably shooting on a cheap Panasonic SVHS camera, but what it did was, through the mistakes you made in the beginning, you'd learn to get better each time, better composition, better timing with your edits, better use of music, working with people who were better at handling dialogue. It's always your friends in the beginning, right? But then you actually would learn to branch out, and actually,
I can even see that doing this.
Oh, yeah,
like my first one, the audio, I don't know what happened with it. The mic was fine, but it was just the way it was hooked up, and I think it was just because I was using like voice memos instead of like the software I'm using now, and it's just like it just sounded muffled the entire time, and then over the time it's been catching up, and like earlier I'd have glitches where the camera would completely die halfway through, or it was like I didn't realize that the clips, once it hits plus 45 minutes, that it'll short out or something like that. So there's kind of like different things that play along, and you can see with you that there was just like there's the passion that was going overriding, wanting you to get better and better and better.
That's
and
the most
pass
important
through your
thing.
friends, yeah.
That's the most important thing. Perhaps it's a sign of good luck. There's the famous story where nothing worked at Disneyland when it first opened, right? And look at it now. It's just this multi-billion-dollar industry.
Owning Marvel, all those.
They own my childhood.
Yeah,
they own the Muppets.
They
own Lucasfilm. they own Marvel.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm really not for that because I think it stifles creativity. But going back to what we were talking about, I wound up taking a lot of media arts classes in high school as well as communications technology, and my teacher, Mr. Wayne Lucy, I'm going to name drop him. He was so terrific, and we would often have students that would win gold medals at the Halton Skills competition for film, a lot of things under the arts, graphic design, and through that I was able to use that to put towards my portfolio as well as my grades. It's important. Anyone who wants to get into that, have a good English grade, very important, and writer's craft. And I was able to get into college, and I was accepted to a few places, but I wound up picking Niagara College because they were willing to pay for your film stock. And for me, that was huge. You know, I can actually say that I was a filmmaker. I have worked with 16 millimeter film. I've worked with 35 millimeter, and there's really nothing quite like it, the intimacy of actually being able to process the film and handle it and that. And they were willing to pay for that, and it could be very expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and it was worth it. My thesis film in final year, I wound up getting to shoot in New York City, in California. It was a comic book documentary. I met some great people and artists, including Tim Sale, who did all the artwork for the old TV show Heroes, and some of the most famous graphic novels, Batman graphic novels, like The Long Halloween. When you watch Batman Begins, all these names like Carmine Falcone, and that comes from Tim.
They take them from the.
They take them from that story.
That's really cool.
Exactly. So it was just an awesome experience. And then really, I never really had any time to kick back after I graduated. I started my first professional gig a few months before I graduated college.
Yeah. Was it like a co-op kind of thing where they just kind of put you in it and then it turned into a job?
No, what it was somebody was looking for an editor for it was like an Entertainment Tonight type of
kind of deal, yeah.
Shoot, yeah. And what it was an actor who was in the film 88 Minutes with Al Pacino, and it was just an interview with him talking about working with Pacino and that kind of thing. And I pieced it together, and they were really happy with it. And through that, I was able to just keep working. I moved to Toronto, where you have to be if you want to start off in film and that. Yeah. And then really, to make a long story short, I was given an offer to go work on OHL Sports out in Sarnia, Ontario. This is where great players like Steven Stamkos, Nelly Akapov, Alex Galchenyuk came from. And really, it was just the insanity of the hours working in film. You know, a 12-hour day is probably a minimum.
Yeah.
In film. It could be often 14, 16 hours, you know, bad turnaround time between one day to the next. And just the thought of having a 9 to 5 was just so appealing to me. And
really?
So I took that and I cut my teeth, you know, in television, doing OHL Sports in the beginning. From there, I got to do more political things, work on shows like Queen's Park Report with the MPP there, Bob Bailey. Covered federal and provincial election while I was there.
So what were you doing during those times? Like, what were you the camera guy? Were you editing?
No, I was the head producer. So OHL hockey, for example, I was the mobile producer. So I would be the one at the switcher calling all the shots, throwing up all the graphics, that sort of thing. Working with my team of camera, audio, the talent. And it was good. The Sarnia Sting were not the greatest team when I was there. We were only in one. We only had one playoff run during my tenure there, and they were swept in the first round, if I remember correctly.
Well, it's the way it goes. Can't win them all.
Exactly. But at the same time, I got to the schedule wound down significantly after hockey, and in the summertime, you were able to basically create your own original content, which coming from a film background that's all you could ask for. They gave you great creative latitude to just do whatever, as long as the boss approved it, you could do it. And he would say, give me 6 episodes of whatever, or give me one long television special of whatever. So the Sting not making the playoffs probably freed me up to do projects like the Chris Hatfield biography, because if they were very successful, let's say like the Windsor Spitfires, the producers there were going all the way until June right? And then their summer
for sure.
turnaround would only be very short, and then September you're right back at it again.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. That's so much stuff. Like that's just all that in that short amount of time. There's so much experience packed into just that, and it's all kind of fueled by passion. You can tell because you're like you're so into what you're talking about, and I know that definitely translates to the stuff you're trying to do now, what you're going to be doing in the future. So if we want to get into what you're doing now, we can? We can.
I wanted to talk about the Chris Hatfield project quickly, though. That was probably creatively the most fulfilling thing I ever worked on. Chris Hatfield was such a gentleman. I interviewed him out at his cottage on Stag Island, and he picked me up on his boat. It's a private island, so you have to raise a flag. He came and picked me up on his boat and helped me and my team carry our gear and everything.
That's awesome.
Just the ultimate gentleman. And I remember him driving me and my crew in the boat and thinking, if ever I could trust anybody behind the wheel, it's this guy.
Yeah.
This guy could drive rocket ships, you know? He's the first Canadian to walk in space.
Yeah, for sure.
So it was just a terrific experience, and I wound up winning an award for that documentary. And also, this was kind of one of those where you had to pinch yourself, where it was almost too good to be true. So I was married to my wife at that time. We were on our honeymoon in Italy, found out that we won the award. I wasn't able to attend because I was on my honeymoon. Found out we won while I'm in Rome.
Yeah.
And then get an email from Chris Hatfield from outer space, from the International Space Station.
Way. That's so cool.
Saying congratulations.
That's so cool.
And congratulations on our marriage, too. And we made sure to take that and put that in our wedding album.
That's so sick.
Yeah, it was one of those moments where this is almost too good to be true. I was just such a blessed moment in my life. It was incredible.
Even just hearing that's an insane moment because you had someone in space.
In space, yeah.
Sends you an email.
So I remember forwarding that to my parents going, this is coming from outer space from me to you. And my parents were just flipping out,
That's insane. That's one of those crazy moments that you have and you're just like, this didn't happen. No way.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm more eager to see what you're doing because we never really talked about it. You gave me the heads up that you're running, and I never really got to go deep into it. So why don't you fill me in and see what it's all about?
Sure. Well, coming from my background, it's no surprise that the film community, the Toronto community, is a very left-leaning community, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we're talking about traditional liberal values such as free speech and, people assimilating to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, legal migration, things that every liberal stood for decades. And I just saw the party start to slide more and more left to a bit more of an extreme where I came from a background of the arts where I am totally against any censorship of any kind. The late, great Roger Ebert said during his show in the 90s on Siskel and Ebert that political correctness was the fascism of the 90s, and I now say the fascism of our times. The idea that you have to walk and talk and act and speak within very narrow boundaries for fear of offending somebody. That's not right, because what you're doing is practicing ventriloquism. You're not telling people how you actually feel on the inside, and sometimes things are controversial, and sometimes things are an ugly truth, but the truth is the truth no matter what. So sometimes in order to curb bad things, you need to discuss the ugly truths about certain situations so that you can learn from history. The more we try and sweep history aside, the less we're going to learn from it. It's a mistake made over and over again. And I know that things right now, particularly on the south side of the border in the United States, can seem very volatile between conservatives and liberals. However, we've been through this before. Things were like this in the late 60s, and we got over it. I was watching, not too long ago, a making of on Magnum Force, which was the second Dirty Harry film, starring Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how, at the time, it was very fashionable for Republicans to call Democrats communists and for Democrats to call Republicans fascists. Does that sound familiar? Everybody calling everybody communists, fascists, Antifa, this sort of thing. And it made me realize, you know what, we've been through this and we're going to get over this.
That's all it is.
We're going to get over this.
I since I can't actually vote, I have no real true political, not a strong political opinion, but you can see just with anything that there's always the cycle. And I think as a country in Canada, we'll definitely be able to get through it. And there's nothing too big or no big issue. So
Absolutely.
But let's let's shy away from the states and all that type of stuff, and let's go deep into what really brought you into the politics, rather than, because we know free speech is something you really, really like, because you like filmmaking and all that type of stuff. What are the other surrounding causes that pushed you towards joining politics and getting into the running?
Well, it was really just, I saw that the Conservative Party started to become more of a centrist party, but not in a good way. It was one of those, I saw Andrew Scheer trying to appease everybody, and for me, when you try and please everybody, you stand for nothing. That's what I believe. And we've already discussed how I saw the left kind of getting away from free speech and that sort of thing, which wasn't going to work for me. And then all of a sudden, I saw this break off of the Conservative Party with Maxime Bernier. And to me, he was the common sense candidate, where he was talking about free speech, which politically speaking is a hill worth dying on, because it's one of the pillars of democracy. And if we lose free speech, there's not going to be much left. Everything else will slowly start to erode as sure as night follows day. And it was other things like just having good proper trade, simplifying the tax system. We want to bring it down from 5 brackets to 2. It's going to be under 100,000, over 100,000. And that's going to be capped at 15%. So wouldn't that be great? I know you're interested in starting your own private business. Wouldn't that be great if you could make $60, $70, $80, $90,000 and only pay 15%, which is the lowest bracket, unless, of course, you're making nothing. So
that's really cool. That's you're definitely extremely passionate about it. And so you're talking about a new branch of it. I'm not really sure if many people know about the new branch. So what is that, and who started it earlier?
So it's the People's Party of Canada. Maxime Bernier used to be part of the Conservative Party, and in his words, he felt that the Conservative Party was becoming corrupt, and he wanted simpler government. He wanted less government, more money in your pocket. It's really something that I was always about. To me, if you ask the Conservative Party, the NDP Party, or the Liberal Party, do you have any solutions that doesn't require more government power? You're probably going to hear crickets. What we want is less government. We want people to be able to dictate the course of their own lives. We want to be able to empower people by them being able to make their own decisions, start their own businesses, pay less taxes, be ambitious. I really believe in that old saying that if you give a person a fish, you only feed them for one day. If you teach them to fish, you feed them for life.
Yeah, that's true. And that's some big words to leave it off on. Like, that's just kind of, it's more inspirational, and it gets really just, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's something you're definitely passionate about, and I think this is going to be good for the community. Absolutely.
And the last thing I would like to say, too, is the PPC is the only party I see that's not going to pander by using identity politics. To me, coming from my background, my mother is an immigrant. She was not born in this country. And to me, I can't think of anything more racist than identity politics, because what it's doing is it's categorizing everybody based on color and orientation. And it's sort of the antithesis of what Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of. He said his dream was to have people be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So identity politics is the exact opposite of that, and that doesn't fly with me, and it shouldn't fly with Canadians either.
All right, so we were also talking about earlier about how you were the driving instructor, and you've talked to a ton of young people.
A lot of young people, they're very passionate.
And so how did that really, do you see a difference between people, say millennials and my era of Gen Zs? Is there something like that you want to touch on, or is there something, like how, I'm more curious about what you see as the difference, because I see a big difference in like more cultural things where they like different types of music or TV shows or something like that.
There's certainly cultural differences. I mean, I'm a millennial born in the 80s, raised in the 90s. There's certainly a difference between those millennials versus the millennials that were born in the 90s, raised in the early 2000s. Yeah. Those are sort of the ones that are pegged as being perpetually offended and very politically correct and so on and so forth. And they're sort of sandwiched between the 80s born millennials and Gen Zers, who tend to be much more pragmatic, much more calm about things. I love the fact that Gen Zers don't want to listen to what CNN or MSNBC or CBC or CTV has to say. They don't need a journalist regurgitating information. What Gen Zers do is they go to YouTube and they look at what happened and they say, I'm going to make up my own mind on what happened, which is really the best way to go.
That's for sure. And I definitely agree with you, because there's certain things that you see now where people just kind of regurgitate the same information, and then it just ends up being like broken telephone. You'll hear one
Absolutely.
thing and it just completely changes from what actually happened. And you can even see that with like just high school things. You can say one thing to another person, and then you'll give it a week or so, something will go back around, and
Yeah.
you'll hear, that's not at all what I said, or that's not at all what that happened,
Yeah.
or this didn't happen. That's not true.
Yeah.
And that just happens on such a bigger
Yeah.
on a national scale and even a global scale. So it's really crazy just to see how that, and technology's even advanced it too.
Absolutely. And also, having spent a few years around talk shows and news reporting in that, I spent some time working at the CBC for a headlines television talk show and that. And what disturbs me is when I see in mainstream news when the same talking points are hit repetitively over and over and over again, especially when they're not truthful. I mean, this year was a very bad year for fake news. Things like the Jussie Smollett situation, which was, that was not true. The Nick Sandman situation, which was the Covington Catholic kids facing off with the Native American, and that was not as they presented it, and just situations like that, which were totally phony. And Stormy Daniels and her lawyer and everybody saying, oh, he's going to be the one to bring down the president, et cetera, et cetera. Now we find out that he was exploiting her and stealing her money. So
it's really crazy, especially if you think it on for Gen Zers to kind of grow up in this area. This time where there's so much information like that that just gets sent to our brains, because everybody my age has a phone. Yeah. Everybody's connected to the internet. You'll see it on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all that stuff. You're getting constantly filled with news. And you got to really... It's hard to sift through all the nonsense.
You have to be your own filter.
Yeah.
And isolation and repetition are two of the keys to brainwashing. Think about that. So if they're beating the drums of war over and over again, boom, 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 trying to create... I think that the news has a big part to play in a lot of the animosity that's been created and a lot of the divisiveness that's been created in the last couple of years. They certainly have their part to play, and the problem is many stations claim to be neutral when what they're actually doing... If they said this is an op-ed, I could respect that. This is an opinion piece, but when they report it as straight up facts and it's incorrect or it's biased or it's slanted, that's not right. They're not playing straight with...
It's not true news. That makes sense. Yeah, it's really hard to kind of look at everything nowadays because there's so many different sources and there's so many different sides for something. You're never really going to find, say, a party or a news channel or anything that's just straight down the center. It's telling you just the facts, all that stuff. On either side, it's a pain right now because you can't really find anything that's true to what somebody's saying, or you can't find the true facts because it's shifted or wanting somebody to get a new angle on it.
There's always two sides to every story. I remember falling in love with the policies of John F. Kennedy. When I was in high school, I wrote a paper on him, and I thought he was a magnificent president, but then I was also surprised to find out that there's the notion that only Democrats, have fought in favor of African Americans, which historically is not true. It was the Republicans under Abraham Lincoln that fought and spilt their blood to free the slaves. And then in the 1960s, when they had the vote for the civil rights movement, it was 80% of the Republican Congress that supported it, and only 63% of the Democrats did. And then when it came to the 1994 crime bill that Bill Clinton signed, because of that crime bill, I believe it was African Americans between 18 and 35, 1 in 4 were incarcerated. That's crazy to me. So the idea that only Democrats are out to help minorities and African Americans is simply untrue. And the point I'm getting at is, I know we're talking about American history here, but the point is you have to challenge the status quo. We're not taught to think critically in school.
It's not
they really want people to conform, and I don't want collectivism. I want rugged individuality. The West was built on rugged individuality. I don't want everybody acting, speaking, thinking the same. We don't want to be like the Borg in Star Trek. I don't want to be 3 of 5, I want to be Daniel. You want to be Carson.
For sure.
And what makes this country great is the fact that you can have one set of opinions that differ from mine, but if we could shake hands at the end of the day and call ourselves Canadian. That's the biggest thing. For me, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. It doesn't matter if you're a European Canadian, an African Canadian, it doesn't matter. A Canadian is a Canadian. So when there's this divisive talk about you're racist if you're against illegal immigration and this sort of thing. No, that's not true. We're fighting for all Canadians, all across the board, all ethnicities. And to me, I'd like to see us fully, assimilate to the point where we just simply call ourselves Canadians. We're one of the only countries in the world where if I say, hey, what are you? You'll never answer Canadian. You'll say I'm Italian or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very true. It's so many different things too that brings everybody in. It's such a multicultural place. So you were talking earlier about I brought up, you were talking about Italians and stuff like that, and how being able to have such a multicultural place in Canada allows you to see so many different things, and how you're a little Italian and you've been to Italy when you were into Rome for your honeymoon.
Yep.
And there's just so many different crazy experiences that you've had. Just be able, because you can go to one place and that's all that stuff happens.
Yep.
All the world is pretty much packaged in Canada.
Yep.
Which is so great because every Canadian's got their own way of doing things, right?
It is. My mother was born in Portugal, and she came with my grandparents in search of a better life, and Canada was just so amazing for them. My grandfather was a private business owner, and then he worked for a union later on in construction, and this country has been very good to my family on both sides, and we need to learn that the word assimilate is not a dirty word. My family on my mother's side learned to assimilate to the Canadian culture, to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Our charter is one of the greatest documents. It really covers everything, from religious freedom to freedom of expression and that. And it's really just, when I say a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, my dream is that we just all identify as Canadians. If we're born here, that we all just adopt this great nation and we stop this divisiveness and we just accept each other as we should. That we even, drop the hyphen, that we're just Canadians. You know what I mean? That would be the best unity of all.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
End of story. As long as everybody can just be Canadian, it doesn't matter what you are, or who you are, whatever you do.
Still being able to practice your traditions, your religious traditions, your family traditions, your ethnic traditions. But in the end, we're all Canadians. We all assimilate to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that to me is the greatest thing of all. That to me would be the simplest, most beautiful thing. Most things aren't complicated. People make things complicated.
Very true. I think, honestly, we need to end it there because that was amazing, and I'll definitely need to have you back on.
Absolutely.
Once everything goes. But everybody, thank you for coming back to episode 6 of Carson's Conversations. This has been great with Dan. He's one of my favorite people. He really motivated me to get me on and kind of create my own conversation because we always had great conversations and stuff like that. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming by. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Definitely.